Oh, that was incredible. And also, the FTC got 2 gut punches in a row. And then, Amazon writes this petition to recuse Lina Khan.
It's like, that's why she was hired.
Incredible.
She was hired because she's an expert on Amazon.
The Amazon letter was actually extremely well written and basically said, I know that she's in charge of basically finding fairness, and fairness seems to be that we will get legislated, but we believe that it's unfair to us, so please take her out of the mix. I just think it was fantastic. I mean, it's incredible. It's like, isn't this the point of having her in the job?
It's like, we've hired a new prosecutor who specializes in organized crime, and the Gambino crime family has petitioned to have them
exactly recused.
recused from doing any organized crime.
Right. Their argument is that she should be recused because she published articles on how that Amazon should be broken up. And they're saying she's already prejudged the situation. There's no way this is going to fly. There's no way she's going to get recused. But I think what they're trying to do is put an argument on appeal so that if Lina Khan does break them up somehow, they can then go appeal to the Supreme Court or wherever. And this is basically reserving an argument they can make later.
So just to highlight, the FTC brought this case against Facebook, saying that they're a monopoly and their monopolistic practices are damaging the market. The DC federal court threw out the case, and they basically said that the FTC failed to demonstrate in any way that Facebook has a monopoly over anything, because they kept using the 60% market share term, and they're like, 60% what? And the FTC was never able to give them data or facts to indicate what Facebook has a 60% share of. There are other social media services, there are other advertising platforms, there are other content sites that are all in aggregate much larger than Facebook. And so the case was dismissed because there was no demonstration at all.
Yeah, which is why Lina Khan is
of the traditional definition of a monopoly. And then Elizabeth Warren comes out 2 days ago and says, we need to rewrite the laws, the antitrust laws entirely, redefine what it means to be a monopoly, redefine what this impacts. And so I think the big question is, how much of a priority is it going to be for this administration and for this Congress before they're out of session and we end up with a split Congress again, to step up and rewrite antitrust laws at this point? Is this really a high priority question? Or is it going to get overruled? That's
why Lina Khan is being brought in, is to take another approach, like we talked about on the last episode, which is, the harm is competition and not the monopolistic power, but downstream competition, as Chamath eloquently explained on the last pod. The irony of the Elizabeth Warren statements was that she released them on Twitter, not her Facebook. Somebody dunked on her like, she's talking about the monopolistic powers of Facebook on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. You have an alternative, was the point. Sachs, I mean, how big of a like legislative priority is this going to be for Democrats? Because
Huge.
This could be, if they rewrite the laws, it could be impactful to Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, everyone.
Huge. It's a huge priority. There's 6 bills that just got passed in the House and it's going to the Senate. And I do think
moving fast.
This is one of the areas where you could actually get some bipartisan agreement in the Senate. You remember, it's a 50-50 Senate. All it would take would be a few Democrats to defect and they wouldn't be able to pass anything. But you got 21 Republicans who supported Lina Khan. So, that says to me that legislation is likely. I think it's going to go through. I think we are going to see some big changes. And in fairness to Lina Khan, this FTC lawsuit that got thrown out was brought before she got there. She didn't have a chance to shape those arguments. They have 30 days to refile. It'll be really interesting to see how she handles this hot potato now, whether she brings the lawsuit in a different way in the next 30 days or whether she lets it drop. But I do think that of all the big tech companies, the argument for breaking up Facebook is the weakest, because it's true. Like it's harder to say definitively they have a monopoly in social networking when you've got Twitter, you've got Snapchat, you've got Reddit, you've got TikTok, you've got LinkedIn, you've got so many other companies in social media. But that does not mean that the argument against Amazon, Google, and Apple isn't strong. Those companies are clearly monopolies or duopolies in their spaces. Nobody can effectively compete with them. Their network effects or monopoly scale effects are
I think that Facebook's monopolistic impact probably tends towards some form of information distribution, but it's a very technical argument that has to be framed accurately on the one side, or It's how they've aggregated long-tail advertisers on the other. But to your point, David, on the idea of social networking, I don't think they're a monopoly in the least.
Well, also, they're relitigating the approved acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. I kind of feel like if you bought these things and you approved it, what is it, 9 years ago and 7 years ago?
Like, reason. Yeah, they said if you guys had an issue, that the state's attorney general that filed the suit against the Instagram acquisition and WhatsApp, they're like, if you had an issue with it, you should have filed the suit years ago. You waited too long. And clearly there's, other motivations. Like, just because Google was successful buying YouTube doesn't mean you can go back in and unwind YouTube, because they did a great job building YouTube. 99.999% of YouTube's success is because of Google, not because of YouTube. They took a small team and they rebuilt that whole thing and they scaled the heck out of it.
Let me ask you a question to Sachs. If these companies paid more taxes and got out of the censorship business, do you think they could maybe take a little wind out of the sails of these?
Yeah, of course. Look, the only reason those 21 Republicans have now gotten on board with regulating the power of these big tech companies is they see those big tech companies using their gatekeeper power to restrict free speech, and it's all one-sided and it's partisan against, their side of the aisle, because these companies are populated, generally speaking, by people on the other side of the aisle. And so, big tech, if they had just reined in their own impulses to want to censor the other side, they would not be in the hot water they're in right now.
Can they unravel that now? Because it seems like Facebook is starting to backtrack on the Trump ban.
Well, they haven't.
Twitter isn't.
And I think they got a big problem now. No, look, I think they should have been doing this over the last couple of years.
The cat's out of the bag. What they thought could never happen all of a sudden became arbitrary. And the thing that they did was they started to legislate. A private company started to legislate power. And that's just a third rail issue. The minute you do that, you have every government in the world saying to themselves, wait a minute, I am only focused on this one thing, right? I don't take a huge salary. I've been grinding at the low levels of politics for 40, 50 years to get to this exact place. And now I have a bunch of hipsters in Menlo Park telling me what I can and can't say to the people that I worked a lifetime to basically be able to govern over. I mean, it can't stand.
Yeah. So I think a big mistake that Zuckerberg made goes all the way back to 2016. Facebook basically bought into the disinformation argument. They apologized for it. That was the time for Zuckerberg to fight. He should have said, no, listen. Was the FSB, were these bad actors on Facebook? Yes. But when you look at the total number of impressions and page views, it was like a drop of water in the ocean. We're not the ones who caused this election to go the way it did. Obama used Facebook very effectively in 2008, and nobody had a problem with us then. And that was the time to fight.
That was the time to fight. And to your point, David, he actually should have been even more. He said the reason Trump got elected was not me, but it was Obama. He could have really gone on the attack, and he would have done himself.
Well, look, Hillary just ran a bad campaign. If Hillary had just campaigned in Wisconsin, it would have gone a different way in 2016. So what Zuck should have...
she had an idiot team. She had a terrible team,
and they were bad at everything, including Facebook.
Including everything.
They were just bad at social media. So Zuck should have said, listen, don't blame us for the fact the campaign was bad at social media.
They put victory into the jaws of defeat.